Hey readers, I'm Leandra.
And I'm Danny, and we're not reading for content.
This is a monthly book club podcast dedicated to reading in depth and leaving no plot point unturned. Each month, we read one book over the course of 3 episodes, basically reading a third of the book at a time. Feel free to listen along, or better yet, read the book with us. Our first season of the book club has the theme of genre blends. A list of books and the club schedule will also be in the description.
This month, we are reading The Cautious Traveler's Guide to the Wastelands by Sarah Brooks. And today, we're going to be discussing parts 3 and 4, which is around 70% of the book. But before we get started, we have to cover our bookish bite of the week.
Yes,
so
give it
today, I would like to discuss the fact that the Goodreads Choice Awards is coming up. I know for you guys that are listening to this right now, it is in the past, but for us, it is up and coming, and I am excited. But as we're representing genre blends here on the podcast, I would like, Leandra, your discussion, your thoughts on the fact that Goodreads doesn't really allow for genre blends within the Goodreads Choice Awards, or there are certain genres that get the genre blends and others do not. What do you think?
Well, we're starting off the podcast angry, I guess. It's fine. Yes. So, Danny, you know how I feel about this. I feel as though there are quite a few elements to the Goodreads Choice Awards that could be corrected, adjusted, changed. I mean, we see that they've made changes before. Speaking of genre blends, last year we saw the introduction of Romantasy, literally a genre blend with romance and fantasy put together, and they easily find 20 titles to do it for. And I get that not every genre blend is going to have that in every year, but I feel as though we are restricting these books that are beautifully blending two genres together and forcing them to be categorized as one or the other. Because you can see on Goodreads that, it'll say, for instance, mystery, fantasy, even the book we're reading this month, on those little tags, it is listed as historical, as fantasy, as mystery. Those are 3 different categories that this book could have been in. In fact, and there are some haunting, horrific descriptions that we've been seeing. So there are even some horror elements. I wouldn't say that that's part of that genre, but you can just see that this book blends so many together. And yet, realistically, we kind of know already that it could only be optioned for one. I actually have got 2 theories. And Danny, I want to hear your thoughts, because the second one is just coming out of my head right now. So when I say it, maybe I'm actually going to disagree with myself in the next second.
Looking forward to it.
Okay, yeah. So we'll workshop this. We'll see what happens. But the first one is, I think that Goodreads should probably change its rule that a book could only be a part of one genre, because it is part of the rules. It says that a book cannot be optioned in 2 different genre categories. The only 2 different categories it can be in is one genre and one as a debut author. So that really lowers your amount of books that you can even have in those 2 categories. But for instance, there's a book that has come out this year that Danny and I absolutely love, The Tainted Cup. She knows where I'm going with this. And I think that it should at least have the opportunity to be considered in mystery. And that's also me saying I think mystery should be its own category. We're opening up a different can of worms here. I won't get into that. But my second option is actually providing a category for genre blends. I feel like that could actually be really cool. And that is obviously just providing a variety of different types of blends. Some people would be like, oh, well, would you throw Romantasy in there? And I'm like, well, obviously if it has its own category, maybe not, but I wouldn't be against it. What do you think, Danny? I want to hear your thoughts on this bookish bite.
I think out of the 2 of those options, I like the second one better. Which that's probably a hot take. People are probably like, no, because the Romantasy category did just come out. And I know a lot of people were so ecstatic that it got its own category. And I was one of them last year that I was really glad to see that happen, mainly because I get frustrated that Romantasy or romantic fantasy books win all of the time. And the big epic fantasy books that I love a lot of times get looked over because of the more popular Romantasy category. So I am glad to see those separated. But I do think that there are a lot of genre blends that don't get recognized because of the fact that they are genre blends. And I think that there are certain genres that are more accepting. Fantasy and sci-fi, I do think, get a lot of blends mixed in on the Goodreads Choice Awards. I do think that they are more accepting of that. But like you said, the Tainted Cup, I do not think it will ever be in the mystery category, even though it is just as much mystery as it is fantasy.
Here, let me actually volley a question back to you. So, this idea of genres, some genres being more accepting of genre blends than others, or at least if we're gonna find a genre blend, it's gonna be in these categories. Sci-fi, fantasy, why do you think that is versus a few other categories? Because my thoughts are with fantasy and sci-fi, a lot of times that's because they're the setting, they're the surrounding element. For instance, Tainted Cup, as an example, the A plot is a mystery, right? It's surrounded heavily by fantastical elements. The mystery is impacted by the fantastical elements that these characters are interacting with. With that said, though, like the A plot, the plot is a mystery. So I think it's interesting that I understand. My immediate thought was, if anything, it's probably going to be the fantasy category. And I was like, that's kind of interesting to think, especially when we're thinking about how it's divided. It seems as though we're focusing on setting and the outside kind of dressing, like the world, more than we're focusing on the narrative plot.
See, I would have looked at it from the sense of reader's perspective. I think that fantasy readers are more likely to read genre blends than people who focus on mystery, historical fiction, things like that. I think that because of the fact that fantasy is a setting, it does align itself, and sci-fi, they align themselves very easily to having those other elements in there because there has to be a story. So yes, we have all these magical components, but what are we going to do with them? Whereas I feel like a lot of people who read just straight mysteries or just straight historical fiction, they could very easily stay in their own lane, I guess, and not venture out because their narrative, their purpose of a mystery or the purpose of a historical fiction, books like that, is the mystery or is the historical piece of it. So I think that from a reader's perspective, I think that it's because fantasy and sci-fi readers do have to branch out in a lot of the books that we read.
Yeah, or more so, those who don't like fantastical elements, who don't like sci-fi, obviously will object to having to read a book that is set in that world just to get the satisfaction of the mystery or
Right.
even of a thriller, for instance, because sci-fi thrillers are quite popular. However, purist thriller readers are less likely to accept the idea of a sci-fi thriller, depending on how far outside the real world it is. So it almost seems like it's more readers who need some type of grounding in the real world versus readers who, they are more accepting of a fantastical world. They're more accepting of a sci-fi world. It's that I think that's harder to accept. It's easy to accept a mystery in a book. It's really hard to accept a fantastical world unless you're game for it.
Right. It's more of a commitment.
Honestly, we could talk all day about genre blends, their place in the Goodreads Choice Awards. Who knows what will happen this year, next year, whatever. But what we're here for is to actually talk about this book. So, can you remind us of what happened in this most recent section?
Yeah, absolutely. So today's pages, we start in dire circumstances because the water shortage on the train has gotten worse. And we get to see the implications of what that means for the passengers, but also what it means for the different casts of passengers and how it impacts each of them differently. We also know that Elena is connected to water in some way. And
Yeah.
so throughout the pages from today, she is drastically changing in appearance and suffering from the water shortage as well. And Wei Wei is trying to help as much as she can, but because of the rationing, she's having a hard time getting access as well. The train is also to, add more chaos. We have the train being derailed or it's being forced to be put on the ghost rails, as they call them, which are these abandoned tracks that they have through the wastelands that they have not been maintaining because the major railway that they were supposed to be on is hit by lightning in the middle of a rainless storm. So it is absolutely ludicrous. After this, we know then that the train can no longer continue on to the well. They have to continue on to a second well. They also have added several days to their track, and obviously it's less safe because they're on a railway that has not been maintained in multiple years. So they decide to stop. Well, they actually have to stop because there is standing water on the tracks and they want to make sure that the train can safely go through. There is a plan for the captain to go out and check the water levels. In this, we have our character Henry, who decides to run amok and go out into the wilderness and study the wastelands. Wei Wei heroically volunteers to go after him, kind of selfishly, because at this point in time, Elena has also decided to go back to the wastelands because of her need for water. And crazy things happen out in the wasteland. As they come back, they are without Elena. They have brought some specimens upon board that may or may not cause some trouble. We also have Suzuki, who has revealed at this point in time that part of the glassmaker's work, the telescopes that he has, have shown the people on board, including himself, the patterns that are within the wasteland and how they connect with each other. And they essentially learned more about the wastelands than they really wanted to know. And that has some implications for the future as well.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. I mean, if y'all didn't realize this before, this is a complicated narrative. Like, there are so many parts, there are so many dangers, and I can't enough like sing praises. I'm still impressed with this novel. I'm still like so invested. And I think that this balance of the water shortage along with the issues that are going like outside the train, we're playing with different types of dangers. We're playing with fantastical dangers, right? Like dangers that, can we see them? Can we comprehend what these creatures are able to do, outside of our reality? And then there are the dangers within the train. Fellow people, also the lack of water. I mean, that in itself is a health hazard. And also the dangers of, unfortunately, being a part of the lower class, because we're also seeing some selfishness going on in prioritizing the first class passengers, and the crows are keeping water for themselves. So there's corruption going on, and just so much distrust. And it obviously cannot be like mentally or emotionally healthy to be on this train right now, let alone physically unhealthy, because we don't have access to water.
Yeah. It is very annoying, or it was very annoying as I was reading those pages, with seeing all spectrums of it. So we have the crows who have their own stash. We have the first class, which are like, they're getting coffee every day and they're complaining about how they can only have one glass and they can only bathe like every 3 days or something.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have the third class. And also, it was mentioned that the first class gets a jug of water. Each person gets a jug of
Yes.
water every morning. And in third class, they don't get that because we don't have enough water. And it was essentially said to lie to them that we just don't have the resources for it. Not that the first class people are getting this option. It's that everyone in the train has the same circumstances. And that's not true, which I'm sure that they know, but that's very frustrating.
Yeah, and it honestly is, it's quite funny that the author is, obviously poking some dark humor at these first class passengers, being like, oh my gosh, why can't I have my tea? Why can't I have, these, very luxurious things? They think suddenly they're living in squalor. And it's like, no, you actually are still quite pampered. We are
Right.
in, a situation that is like, code red. Like, people could die if we don't, ration our water appropriately. And the fact that they're complaining that they can't, have a bath or something is quite silly, and they don't realize it. And I think it speaks to the fact that privilege is invisible to those who have it. They don't realize how much they actually have, especially when obviously the train does a great job of keeping the the third class people far away from the first class people. So they don't even see,
Right.
they can't even compare their experience. And that is obviously just really frustrating. On top of the fact that I officially have a desired kill count. I guess I'll say I have a list of characters I want to die. And
Is
I was
Henry at
like,
the top of your list? Because he's at the top of mine.
yeah, so Henry, number one, dude, you should have died. I actually, that's one criticism or one regret I have, is I'm like, I wish he had died when he left this train. And then after him are the two crows, because they perfectly too. Like, it's really a great uneasiness that they give me when they're on on the scene with other characters. So I get their purpose. They are doing a great job of me hating them, but I'm just like, I really hope that you get your just desserts by the end of this book. That's all I have to say.
And I'm scared for the professor, kind of speaking of the crows. So the
Yes.
professor is now, I don't think we mentioned it in the last episode, but
I don't think we did.
the professor comes down kind of ill because of looking outside. He essentially focused a little bit too much on the outside. And he's been on a lot of different train rides. And so it has impacted him. And he,
I actually have a different interpretation.
okay.
I wondered if his, I guess like him suddenly taking ill was because that window, when he was looking out it, he saw the crest of the like Russian Empire. I can't remember. It was like a ship or something. And that was linked to the fact that they're still using Anton Ivanovich's glass. And that's what kind of gave him his sudden, feelings of fear. And maybe he was overwhelmed that way. However, it could be both. But I feel like that might have been at play here.
I definitely think that could have taken I think that could have made him have that reaction. I don't think that they know about it
Yes.
because they would have removed the evidence, I feel, or they would have like kept people away from that area, perhaps. But yeah, that could be. And so anyway, so he's been taken, regardless. People think that he's ill or that he's taken on the wasteland sickness, and they've put him in a padded room that is locked, and he cannot have any visitors except for, under watch or whatever. And the crow, so I think it was Maria that visits him at one point in time because she wants to talk to him, and he gives her the information about her father's glass, the symbol of her father's glass. Sorry, my dog's in the background. So he gives her the hint that her father's glass is still being used. But he doesn't overtly say it because he knows he's been listening. And it wasn't even at the end of their conversation, but as they're talking, the crows walk in, and you can immediately tell like this foreboding, like he doesn't want to be there. They don't want him to be there. And then later on, when Wei Wei comes to visit him, she notices that he's being drugged.
Yes.
And so I definitely think even if it was wasteland sickness, or a mixture of the two, I think that he is not as ill as everyone is making him out to be. I think they are keeping him sick because he has gotten to the point where he is saying things that the crows do not agree with.
Right. And I think we see an interesting parallel because he's obviously the first person to quote unquote become sick, and he's isolated. The second person, the person we don't like, Henry, let him be tortured, whatever. He is also in a similar situation where he's being closed off. He's in a room without any windows, and he's also being visited by the train's physician, the doctor. And I can kind of see how in both cases for the professor and for Henry Gray, this distrust with the doctor. The doctor is the train's doctor, the company's doctor. So anything you tell the doctor that, could be true also could be twisted and manipulated, passed on to the crows. So this explanation that the professor's being drugged, obviously the doctor's in on it. And then also Henry Gray making sure to lie in a perfect way where like he tries to avoid the doctor's interest. We see that happening. And even Wei Wei, too, I believe, has an interaction with the physician at one point where he kind of asks her a question and she's like, nope, I didn't see anything. I don't remember anything. And he's like, okay, well, if anything else changes, let me know. And she's like, yeah, right. Okay. And it's that. So it's kind of funny how there's no trust. You can't trust anyone who's meant to take care of you. Like it's pretty much the longer you're on the train, the sooner you learn that you need to take care of yourself. You need to look out for yourself. Saying less, offering less is your safest option.
And so we've talked about all of the events kind of surrounding this main event that happened. The reason that Henry has now been taken under the wing of the doctor and been locked up is because he decided to venture out into the wastelands. Okay, let's dive into this scene. So he goes out to the wastelands. He travels randomly in a direction, which first off is stupid. He has like these moments. I freaking hate his character. It pisses me off. Like him, everything that he was saying, he's talking about like how beautiful things are. And he learned when he was young to stay still. So these creatures that live really fast will think he's a rock and lifeless. And he is just thinking that he's essentially God amongst,
Right.
all of the nature or whatever that is around him. And he doesn't realize the danger that he is in the entire time he is there. He sees this sap, which I also want to talk about. I want to come back to the blood of the wastelands, as it's been called. He gets enamored with it and almost pulled into this web. Talking about this spider web bird that is hunting via these webs that creatures the size of horses get stuck in, and all these birds, descend from the sky and eat it. And of course, Henry runs away, falls into a little pond area,
Classic.
and is getting attacked by the birds and drowning. And I mean, it was just an absolute crazy scene. Before that, though, he even took off his helmet, which I'm like, who are you? Like, he doesn't have Elena. Elena in the last episode, I don't think we talked about this either, or was that in this episode? That Elena tells Wei Wei that that the air in the outside won't hurt her.
I think it happened in this section when they were discussing it and they were in their little, hideaway. And it's when Wei Wei's asking her questions, trying to figure out, like, what is she? And that's when we learned that, like, Elena's been watching the train for quite some time. That she's also the Garrison ghost, by the way.
Yes.
I love that discovery. I was like, yes, okay. So that's explained. I love that we call back to that. And so she's been observing this train for so long, way, before we had that like 10-month break of no trains going on. And then she ends up sneaking onto the train. She obviously scares the guards, the soldiers on the wall, being, viewed as this ghost. And so she's kind of explaining to Wei Wei why she even found herself on the train. And she just was attracted to this foreignness, this strange, creature, this train. What is it? And then while they're passing information back and forth, Elena is determined to open up the skylight. And of course, Wei Wei, being told for so long that that's extremely dangerous, that you don't want to be breathing this air, Elena says, it will not harm you. The air is fine. And we do have this beautiful scene where they get to experience the speed of the train, with their heads poked out. I really love that. As, of course, I think there were these kind of mutated or strange elk, stag-like creatures in the distance, and their sounds, it sounded like they were singing. But I also think that it's the beginning of Elena realizing that she is losing her connection to the land, to the wastelands, because later on she ends up saying that she can't understand them anymore, that she doesn't know if they're mocking her or if they're angry with her or if they're calling her back. And that's extremely unsettling. It's kind of interesting that even her being a creature of that place, if she's not there or not, if she's away long enough, she also loses that language, at least the ability to speak with them. So yeah, very interesting. But anyways, so yes, so that's when she ended up, telling Wei Wei that the air isn't dangerous. But Henry, this idiot, he had no idea. The scientist, he's like, oh, and I think it's like in his haze, he thinks that, he just kind of does it. And I think it shows that you really can't think straight when you're out there, typically.
Right. And so we have then at this moment, he's considering that, he's going to die. He has these things in his head where he's like, I can't believe that it ended this way. Like, before I got to prove myself. And then he is saved by Elena. And so she has come back into, really, I felt she was, I think this scene kind of answered the question of whether or not they were mocking her, calling her back. I feel like she was very much accepted back into the wilderness. And that goes back to the conversation that Suzuki has with Maria. Suzuki, if we didn't mention, is the cartographer of the train. He is the one who has studied everything and mapped out these railways and things. And so he has this discussion about how these telescopes that they've made have helped them be able to see patterns and connectivity. And so I think that connects to Elena saying, I can't hear them anymore. I don't feel them anymore. She was losing this connection because of her. I don't know if it was because she was on the train or if it was because she was traveling away from where she originally was. But I love the imagery and the depiction of the wastelands as all one interconnected being. that is
Mhm.
working together for its goal,
Yeah.
which we haven't talked about yet. What did you think about the reveal that every time the train, like, not every time, but like the train moving more and more across the wastelands was causing more and more changes within the environment? What did you think?
Yeah, I loved how it comes back to the idea of this issue with, the glass worker and Suzuki discovering this. There's the company is trying to, of course, like have as many trips as possible, and how the empire is dependent on it. So there were some of these like financial reasons, like the collapse of import exports, of having certain goods being passed along. So from a company perspective, they were like, of course we're not going to stop this, but we are impacting the environment. And I was just thinking, this is beautiful social commentary on climate fiction. I love it. Oh my gosh. So Danny and I, we geek out about climate fiction all the time. It's one of my favorite areas in any type of narrative, when we can find some way of, connecting the environment and humans interactions, humans harm of the environment. And, the fact that we can't sit back and pretend that we aren't, impacting the flora and fauna around us. So this was just beautifully done. The idea of us being so afraid of this nature of these wastelands, but in reality, we're the ones who are causing these crazy mutations. I really loved that, of course. What did you think? I'm assuming you liked it too.
I did. I thought it was a very creative way of tying that social commentary in with the narrative, but also it did remind me, and I know we've talked about this before. I don't know if we've talked about it on the podcast or if we've talked about it individually, but we talked about the connection between this book and Annihilation. And
Mm-hmm.
I felt that with that moment. I do like it better in this book than I liked it in Annihilation, because I think it's explained a little bit better in this. But I really did appreciate the I really like the picture of all of the patterns and all the connectivity, and then that being impacted by this outside force constantly coming in, with the connection of corporate greed, with the company being told by Maria's father that this is happening, and there's evidence. Like, we have evidence now that we can see that we are impacting the environment. We are making these changes happen, and they just overlooked it, and or not even overlooked it, they covered it up.
Yeah, they covered it up. They elected to blame him. They found a really great scapegoat, and they were like, "Oh, two birds, one stone. We can cover up whatever happened 10 months ago, and also get rid of this guy who is, going to expose us and possibly prevent us from making a higher profit." And there was a specific moment in which Suzuki is explaining to Maria what is actually happening, these patterns. And I feel as though he said something similar to, we saw these patterns and we started seeing the same patterns in the train, inside the train. And that's when they were like, wait, that can't make sense unless we are connected in that way, and we're clearly impacting. And also leading up to that, we kept seeing the creatures outside mimicking the train. How when they were first looking out, they're like, oh, there's trains outside. It's like, no, actually these are, shadowy figures, these creatures from the wastelands that are moving in the same way that the train does, looking in and just mimicking. Mimicking is such an interesting concept as well, and to use it in this way to show impact is really fascinating. Also, I think it's quite interesting that all of the characters who are really at the center of this novel are nomadic in a way, in the sense that they don't have a permanent home
Yeah.
currently. So we have Maria. She has nothing behind her. She only has what is forward, the truth, because her family has fallen apart. She doesn't have the future that was meant for her. So now she is quite nomadic in this world. She's homeless in a way. Then we also have our, young protagonist, Wei Wei. Her only home is the train, a train that is moving, that is never still. So she is also just inherently nomadic. Then we have Henry, who has been nomadic for quite some time in his search to redemption, to obviously like bring himself back to society, to earn his place back in the society that rejected him. So when he's on this train, he has practically no money to his name. So he is also quite desperate in the fact that he doesn't have a home. And then we've got Suzuki, and Suzuki also doesn't have a home. And I love the historical relevance to that because in this time, when we're thinking 1899, they're discussing how Japan has closed its borders. No one in, no one out. And if you do leave, then you are exiled. You are not allowed to return. And so because he has taken that step as a cartographer to expand his knowledge elsewhere, he has now abandoned his own home. And that also is among the reasons why he didn't join Ivan, or Anton, I should say. He didn't join Anton in signing his name with this complaint. And in essence, if he had signed it, he may have received a similar fate to Anton Ivanovich, the glass worker. But I understand that fear because he, like every other character, every other main character on this train, they don't have much else beyond this train at the moment. The train is all they have, which is also just very interesting. Meanwhile, in opposition to this, we have Elena, who she, for a very brief time, in a way rejected her home, right? She decided to look elsewhere. She decided to experience the train. And in doing that, she immediately felt a severing to the Wastelands. And fortunately, she has returned. Who knows? I'm assuming we're going to see her again. But for now, she is back home and she is safe. And she is really the only one in this narrative who does have a proper home, and it's deemed like the most dangerous place. So I find that very interesting.
And actually, to go back to Elena, I know we keep coming back to this scene where Henry is drowning, but I think it really was like the pivotal scene. So Elena saves him, and Wei Wei comes upon this scene, does have like moments of thinking that Elena was the monster in this case and was trying to kill him. You see the betrayal on Elena's face when she realizes that Wei Wei doesn't completely trust her. And then Elena tells Wei Wei that she has to leave. Wei Wei is willing to give up her life on the train and stay in the Wastelands because she wants to be with Elena. And Elena's like, this is not a place for you. And then we find out what happened to Rustov, the man who wrote the Cautious Traveler's Guide, the fact that the Wastelands killed him because he didn't belong and he took things that didn't belong to him. And so then there's that theme again, coming back to climate, where Elena relates like this stuff needs to stay put. And she says that Henry needs to go. You need to go. It's not safe for you here. Don't let him take anything. It's not yours to take. Leave it here. And then what do they do?
And I was so sad. I was so disappointed in Wei Wei. You know, I understand that she feels hurt. She has this first connection to someone, you know, a first kind of sense of family, especially when there's been so much change. The captain has been distant from her. The professor has been distant from her, or at least she's been distant from him ever since she learned that this would be his last journey. So I understand her feeling as though she needs to find a new person, a new family. And so she was thinking, you know, Elena could be that. It also broke my heart when Elena, you know, saw in Wei Wei's, you know, shout of don't, that she thought Elena would hurt Henry Grey, that she was a monster, that she was capable of this, while in reality, the monster in that situation between these two people, it is Henry. He is the monster who has, you know, of course, disturbed paradise in its own way, right? He is the snake in the grass. And yeah, I felt really sad to see that connection, you know, kind of cut in a certain way, you know, and of course, Wei Wei is very hurt from that too. So her idea is, oh, I will take a token, you know, it reminded her of Elena, I think specifically like her kind of blue essence, her hair and her skin. But I know that there's going to be some negative consequences, especially because almost in the scene, currently Wei Wei has sided with Henry, has sided with humanity. You know, it's almost like, unfortunately, it is like man versus nature. And in the worst sense, where like man is clearly the villain, man is clearly, you know, exploiting nature, using it for his own gain, thinking that the world was built for him, right? That's Henry's perspective as a religious naturalist, as someone who wants to find his religion in the world around him. So I was really sad to see Wei Wei do that, but I think it almost is a bit of a like coming of age, almost her loss of innocence And in this final third of the book, I'm hoping that we will see her kind of finding a way to correct it. Like, she has caused damage in doing this, but I think it's also why we will be seeing Elena again, and possibly whatever dark creature Elena was, leading away from them, because that is also, we've got another baddie in the mix. Like, there's another evil figure. Elena's not alone in this world. And I can't imagine that this being is going to take kindly to the fact that they did end up successfully taking things and putting them on the train. I think the ending section was really like lovely and eerie, where Wei Wei is trying to go to sleep in her bunk, and under the covers, kind of away from her, are the jars of like little bugs, creatures, specimen that he ended up stealing. And she kept hearing it like tinkling on the glass, and then she was also saying something to the fact where it sounded almost like there was something knocking on the glass, and the idea is, well, is it the glass in the jars, or is it the glass outside the train, like knocking on the window? So yeah, very eerie indeed.
I have two more things that I want to talk about, but feel free to add in whatever you think we've missed. One of them is, just very briefly, I want to mention the fact that the captain has this discussion with Wei Wei at the end that essentially says that she is being pushed out of being captain. I think we haven't seen a lot from her, and this is kind of the first, her coming in and helping Wei Wei bring Henry back on the train is the first, not the first scene, because we also saw her at a dinner party earlier in the book, but this is the first kind of conversation we get to see between her and Wei Wei. And I thought it was very odd. I understand, but I thought her bringing on this child, she's 16 years old, to tell Wei Wei, as the first person, and probably the person that the crows told her not to tell, that when they reach Moscow, that's it for the captain. The captain's no longer going to be on board. And the captain tells her, I know that you are part of this train and this is going to impact you. And in her head, Wei Wei is screaming, like, you are part of this train too. Why are you not fighting? And I am intrigued to find out more about that.
Yeah, and it was described as something like, you are the train, like speaking that Wei Wei is, in essence, like more than anyone else, part of the train. And that, like, it's almost as if actually the captain wasn't telling Wei Wei, but was telling the train through Wei Wei. And I think that their relationship is so distant at the moment because of past events, and they have had a bit of a hard relationship throughout, right? Like, it's not like the captain has, accepted the idea of being like, I am your surrogate parent at this point. No, that was never their relationship.
Right.
The captain made sure to keep Wei Wei at arm's length, but that doesn't necessarily mean that their relationship wasn't, close in its own way. And Wei Wei's been hurt the entire book, feeling as though the captain has abandoned her. So I have found that kind of interesting, but I'm wondering if it's going to be something to the effect where the captain knew what she was doing when she told Wei Wei this. Like, she knew Wei Wei would act, especially because, as we've said various times, like at the beginning of this episode, the crows are always watching, and everyone is always aware that the crows are watching. I feel as though everyone is speaking in a way where they know that they are being listened to, and that whatever they say could be manipulated and used. So the captain, I feel like she did this on purpose, and this was her way of putting something in action. We'll see if that actually comes to fruition, because even after she spoke to Wei Wei, who did Wei Wei see immediately after? The crows. And them saying, it's very unfortunate. We wish that the captain had told us she was going to tell you, because then we would have corrected this and basically prevented it from happening. So then they end up threatening Wei Wei to prevent her from telling anyone else. So I'm wondering if the captain has, started something, a domino effect. We'll see what happens.
And actually, so something that you said ties into the last thing I have, which
Good job.
is, you said she told Wei Wei almost by means to tell the train. I have really liked, and we've talked about this before with haunted house stories. I love it when we make an object or a house, a living container, in this case, a train, a sentient being. there are so many instances in this book where they give the train life, and they are acting like the train is acting in its own self-interest, and it has its own mind, essentially.
I agree. And I think you see it quite strongly with Elena's perspective when Wei Wei was talking to Elena and Elena was observing this creature. I think she may have even described it as saying, I didn't really understand what it was, where it was going. And yeah, like her kind of seeing this foreign thing and not really realizing that it is engineered by people, that, you know, obviously there are certain, you know, technological reasons for why a train can keep going, but yeah, from an outside perspective, it just looking like a creature, you know, on the landscape, also causing havoc and looking like the ultimate predator too, as it, you know, makes its way through back and forth. And I think she describes the many eyes. That's what it was. Elena was saying that
Oh,
she was
yeah.
fearful for all the many eyes, and Wei Wei was thinking, what does she mean? And then she realizes the windows, that from Elena's perspective, the train's windows were eyes. And I was thinking, that is so beautiful and outside the box, and obviously something we wouldn't think of as, you know, people. But I love that the author was able to pull herself out of the, you know, our reality and try to think of, what would you think if you didn't know what a train was? Like,
Right.
how would you describe it as like a creature? Just beautiful. Well, on that note, I do think that we've been talking away as usual, and we only have a third of the way to go. Actually, less than that, because as you said, we are at about 70%, and I believe that it is parts 5, 6, and 7. So we're encompassing 3 parts in the final section. But before we sign off, let's answer a few questions like we did last time. So, Danny, how are you feeling? First of all, what kind of rating are you thinking at the moment? Has it changed? Has it remained the same? Who is your favorite character, either overall still, or maybe just in this section? Who do you think shined? And then what questions do you still have? And I realized some of the questions we asked were also not even answered in this one. We're still wondering who this Artemis person is. Maybe we'll find out next time. But anyways, take it away.
I think my rating has gone down just slightly.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like it's feeling like a 4.75, mainly because I think this book for me could be 500 pages and I would be happy, because I want more details about the Wastelands. And I feel like because there's so much packed into this narrative, we're missing some of the details that I like, the world building things that I just eat up. So that's probably what I'm thinking now. I still am like really enjoying it, but I do think that the hype has gone down just mildly for me because the world building's just slightly not there for me. And then as far as my favorite character, I'm actually going to change my answer. I'm not going to say for the entire book. It could potentially change. I really like Suzuki. I am so intrigued by his character and the fact that I don't know, I feel like he has so many different facets and we don't know him really well, but he's been almost protective of Maria, and he has been able to find out and scope out things without being told directly, but he also has this perspective that no one else has and doesn't seem to be really on the company's side when it comes to keeping knowledge secret. So I don't know. I'm interested in what else we're going to see from Suzuki. As far as my question goes, I think my main, I really do want to know what, you know, who the whole Artemis thing is. Is it the professor? Is it not the professor? I am still curious about that. But I think that I also am interested in seeing what are the ramifications of them using this wasteland water to make the train move, which we didn't talk about, but that is one of the things that happens at the very end of our pages from today, is that they decide to use the wastelands water to help move the train along.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What about you?
Interesting. Well, for me, I would agree. At the moment, I'm feeling like a 4.75, which arguably isn't something I give books very often. I feel like that's still very high praise. Obviously, it's 4.75. And weirdly, I agree with you as far as someone who doesn't really like chonky reads. I'm like, yeah, I could read 500 pages of this. Totally. I also am feeling a bit less enamored, mainly because I am wondering if this author would be willing to kill off characters. Because at the moment, we really haven't seen everyone's been in peril. There's been so many dangers, as we've discussed, and yet no one has died. And I promise I don't want everyone to die, but I do. No, so I am kind of two minds about it, but specifically the scene in which Henry takes so many risks. Now, if he ends up being useful, he has a purpose for living on in the third section, then I can understand why the author has decided to let him live after his interaction with the Wasteland. But I have read quite a few sci-fi thriller, sci-fi horror that does utilize someone's death to explain the, karma of deciding that nature is yours to possess. I mean, we see it in Jurassic Park. We've seen it in Into the Drowning Deep, if anyone's read that book. And we also saw it there's a big book that I haven't thought of, but it's in many books. And even like Annihilation, right? We see, actually, now that I'm thinking about it, we've seen it in Annihilation as well. This idea of, Frankenstein, for instance, too. I mean, that's not necessarily climate fiction, but it is in a way, because it is someone who has decided to use like organic material to create someone to play God. So basically, this idea of scientists thinking that they are gods themselves, surrounded by nature. And I wish that Henry could have been punished with his life. For instance, when he was, sinking into the water and he felt arms holding him as if pulling him down, I was thinking, yes, good. I wanted that to happen. And of course, then Elena saves him. It's fine. But that's kind of where I'm losing it, is I don't know if I can trust the author to kill characters when it makes sense to do it. And then my favorite character in the section actually also has changed, but it's not the character you mentioned, although I do like him. He's very intriguing. I like that he has kind of partnered up with Varya and keeping track of her and helping her. For me, it ended up being Elena. I found her quite interesting. Yeah. Her connections to the Wastelands, and also how her own abilities started to waver. Her interactions with passengers and her making them really uncomfortable, and also what really was really powerful for me was her, calling out of Wei Wei, saying, how could you pretty much disregard everything I told you, and now you're treating me as though it's us versus other, and I am the other. So I really liked what Elena represented in this section. And the questions I have is, it really is, what is this second shadow creature? I want to know who else is out there that Elena's afraid of. Because if Elena's afraid of it in her own home, in her own, territory, as it were, that is unsettling. So I want to know what that is. And that concludes our second episode following the characters in The Cautious Traveler's Guide to the Wastelands by Sarah Brooks. We have one more episode, so be sure to tune in next Friday when we finish the book, find out what the finale has in store for these characters. And yeah, we're just really excited. If you, for some reason, joined us in the second episode, be sure to go back, watch or listen to the first episode so you can hear our thoughts at the beginning of the book. And then you can feel free to join us in that final third. But yeah, thanks for tuning in, and we can't wait to see you next time.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Not Reading for Content. Be sure to check out the description for a schedule of our upcoming reads for this season. For reminders and other updates, you can follow the podcast on Instagram at Not Reading for Content. Where else can the listeners reach you, Leandra?
I have a booktube and a bookstagram. My booktube is Leandra the TBR0, and my bookstagram is at Leandra_the TBR0. How about you, Danny?
I actually have the same, a booktube and a bookstagram. Both of them can be found at danny.dabbles. Thanks again for listening. Don't forget to tune in next Friday for our next episode.